Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's episode of Screen Club / Cinema Lab. My name is Sarah Naraki. I am the director of Wealthy Theater, the founder of Cinema Lab, and all-around film nerd here to talk to you about Fargo and Fargo. So I've got two familiar faces with me tonight, Caleb and Virginia. How are you guys doing?
Hi.
Hi.
Quite well.
Well, thank you guys for taking the time to chat tonight. This is going to be an interesting chat because we're going to be combining TV and movie for this and kind of seeing how they compare and contrast. So for anyone who is joining us for the first time ever, welcome, first of all. Secondly, spoiler alert, like hardcore spoiler alert, but also shame on you if you haven't seen Fargo the movie. I mean, I forgive you about the TV show, but the movie, come on, it's quintessential cinema. But we will be spoiling some plot points, so forgive us now and maybe hop off of this chat and you can come back later. We're going to have this archived on Wealthy Theater's YouTube channel. And then Caleb also generously puts it together as a podcast, so you can find the Wealthy Theater podcast on any of your favorite streaming platforms. So don't worry, you can catch this conversation later. But for those of you who have seen either the movie and or the TV show and want to join in, this is a book club style chat. So we want you guys to comment and let us know what you're thinking. So you can just add your comments on whatever platform you're watching from, Facebook, YouTube, doesn't matter. Comment and we'll try to add it to the conversation. We want to have a dialogue, but since we have to do this virtually, it's the best we can do. So please participate. Otherwise, don't worry, we got a whole lot to talk about so we can fill the next couple hours. All right, so let me pull up my slideshow because, you know, what kind of teacher am I without a PowerPoint?
Cool.
So like I said, we're talking about Fargo and Fargo, but let's start with Fargo. So the Coen Brothers version, of course, because you wouldn't have the TV show without the 1996 amazing film by the Coen Brothers. So Virginia and Caleb, what was maybe a first experience with Coen Brothers? Fargo, something else?
I will say real quick before we start that I was hoping to time our chat tonight with a classic Midwest second winter that I assumed we'd be in. So for you Michiganders, not Floridians, but I really thought that this would be like, you know, we had some good weather, we had that fake spring, then second winter hit, and everybody's feeling like this, you know, existential dread. Thought I'd drop this right in here, but instead it's been like really nice for the last week and a half.
So we have the
Sorry about
existential dread sans snow. Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
pretty much. Yeah.
I picked strawberries earlier this week, y'all.
Oh
So
my goodness.
Don't even get
It
out of
is-
here. Stay
it
in
is
Florida.
it is weatherless here. Yeah, my first experience with the Coen Brothers is, I mean, I'm certain that there were like early things, but if you were to say the word Coen Brothers to me, the first thing I think of is Big Lebowski. You know, classic, more, I would say, more of an overt comedy than some of their others, but then also Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, with you know, a really relatively unknown actor, George Clooney. Is, you know, it was really, I think it was nice. Well, it was really nice of them to give him like a big break, I think. So I think I kind of leaned more a little bit to some of the fantastical elements of Coen Brothers filmmaking. That being said, Fargo is a classic, and I think in terms of also cast and the start of my love affair with one Frances McDormand, this was a really big one for me because I watched it when I was younger, and there are very few representations of pregnant women in a leadership sort of role. And, you know, she, like, just seeing her as a pregnant police officer and sort of this element where it was a part of her storyline, but it wasn't like everything about her, you know what I mean? Like, that was really interesting to me as someone who has the ability to get pregnant. So I just have appreciated a little bit more of their comedy side of their filmmaking, but also, isn't Frances McDormand married to like one of the Coens, correct?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's Joel or Ethan.
Caleb's our fact checker. What is it, Caleb? What's the
I
truth?
actually don't know. I don't know the
Oh
difference
my God.
between the Coens.
It's one of them.
I feel
She
like
is
they
married
kind
to
of
one
just,
of them.
they just join at the hip, and what you're
But
seeing when
really,
you see.
Like
I mean,
a
have you ever
two-headed mythical
Yeah.
creature.
even this
Have you ever
picture, you can't see the
have you ever
difference.
seen a picture of them from the waist down? I don't think so.
The internet is telling me that it is Joel Coen that has the pleasure of being married to Frances McDormand. And
Okay.
to quote Amy Poehler at, I believe, the 2015 Golden Globes, she is the only person in this cast that I would save from a fire. So I love her so much. If you haven't seen Nomadland by Chloe Zhao, which is up for Best Picture, and she's up for Best Director this year at the Academy Awards, Frances McDormand is just a true gift to American cinema landscape. So that's probably my earliest Coen experience.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, growing up, I mean, my favorite movie ever in quotes, is Raising Arizona. It really has been since it came out. It was a real childhood family favorite. So that probably would have been the first one I was aware of by the Coen Brothers. And me being several decades older than you two, I remember Fargo coming out. I was 15 and I saw it right away. I mean, it was a very it just made a big splash because it was just in this post Pulp Fiction period where all these indies were getting a lot of mainstream love and the indie world was spilling into the mainstream. And the Coens had already been on my radar too because of their association with Sam Raimi. They wrote his film Crime Wave that he directed between the first Evil Dead and the second Evil Dead. And, 15-year-old boy, Midwest, Evil Dead is all you think about, basically. So this is when I saw, not maybe in the theater, but definitely rented right away, and the whole family watched and enjoyed.
It's just such a good movie. I think I'm pretty sure that my first Coen Brothers experience was Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? I think I saw it when it first came out. My mom was an English teacher, and so of course anything that's loosely based on some kind of literature is going to be something we all have to watch. And since that's, based off of Homer's Odyssey, we had to watch it. And I loved it. I thought it was so much fun, especially like the Saki Bottom Boys and the catchy song. But then I think I watched Big Lebowski shortly after, so it was one after the other. But of course, at that time, I had no idea that it was the same directors for it, but loved them both very much. And then, eventually watched Fargo and fell in love with that too, just like everything else. But yeah, so there's an element to the Coen Brothers movie that we're going to get into a little later. And I guess I want to throw a question to you guys. Do you feel that the Fargo, the movie versus the TV show, holds up tonally? Do you think that they kind of are the same, or is it drastically different?
Having watched the entire first season, and we should also say that if we're talking about the TV series tonight, we're really just going to focus on the first season.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear any spoilers about anything beyond that because I have not gone beyond that. I'm purposefully waiting until we're done with this, and then I'll dive into those other 3 seasons. But I didn't know what to expect from the show at all. I'd sort of put off watching it because I'm such a fan of the film and such a fan of the Coens, and it's one of those things where it's just like the odds aren't good for it to be good with such high expectations from someone like me. It's just not a thing that typically happens. So when I got into it, I was sort of sitting back with my arms crossed, like, okay, what do you got? Like, you've only got 1 episode or maybe 2, and like, we'll see where this goes. But by the end of the first episode, I felt like the creator, Noah Hawley, really took the world of the Coens and created something that exists in their universe, not just referencing Fargo, but referencing every single one of their other films as if it's its own Coen-verse. And I thought that was fascinating. It's almost like it's set in a slightly alternate reality where anything can happen, and you realize that the rules of normal everyday life don't necessarily apply. And that sort of, not overt, but sort of vague tilt toward almost a supernatural element in these areas really, really excited me, and it definitely paid off for me. I couldn't believe how successful personally the adaptation was.
Well, and I'll piggyback off of that by saying this is the first time in Screen Club history that, guys, I did not finish the homework. I watched the pilot of the first season, and due to the overwhelming emotional state that I seem to find myself in at any given moment during this global pandemic, with violence consistently just filtering in and out of our news cycle, I kind of watched the first episode and was like, cool, good. I'm going to put this away until I am emotionally available to watch it. Because I realized that I think, to the showrunner and creator's credit, it did tonally match a lot of that kind of darkness of the film in a way that, like, I was not capable of like fully processing. And it's definitely not one of those that even now I would be able to watch like in a full sitting, which is a lot of times how we do stuff like this, right? Like a lot of times when we're prepping for something like this, we don't necessarily watch it like 1 week at a time. We do these every month. So there's an element of like binge to how we consume it. And there was no way that I was going to consume 8 hours consecutive or even broken up, like I finished the pilot and it's a little over an hour. So it kind of, is a little on the longer side, but there was a heaviness to it that I was just like, oh, I understand now why the film version, which is a condensed story, it's a God's eye view of this story. It's not this 8 hour, or 10 hour, however many episodes there are. It's not this long arc narrative that I'm now going to have to be fully invested in. And to their credit, to Noah's credit, I think he did a great job. And I know the Coen Brothers like EP'd it, so I'm sure that there was a hand sort of acting as the bumpers on the bowling lane, along the way. But I found that specifically with the dialogue and the way that the dialogue was written, that was the clearest link to me in terms of tonal kind of match, maybe. And it is that almost, like you said, there's like a fantastical element, like a magical realism in a way, but obviously it's not magical, but there's a suspended realism that happens in this universe where it just leans toward violence. And it was presented in a way that I was just, and we kind of talked a little bit before we got on mic, having an avatar like Martin Freeman, who I wouldn't call him a character actor, but he has done similar roles to the one in this first season where he kind of, the outside is a very affable, mild-mannered archetype that then has the capacity for this kind of extreme darkness. And I kind of mirrored that to the William H. Macy character, right, in the film. So I liked how tonally it felt like they were trying to set up similar archetypes. I just really I got done with the first episode, and y'all, that basement hammer scene, don't ever need to see it again. Never need to watch that again. Yeah, pretty rough. Because the wife is like terrible. Yeah, does she deserve to be hammered to death in her basement? I don't think so. Just get a divorce. Like, that's kind of where my mind in a lot of these realms and a lot of these storylines. Just get a divorce. Why are you going to be murdering a person? You know what I mean?
Well, that would be the correct choice, but it's just Coen Brothers.
It would also be a 30-minute story. Yeah.
That's
so.
Right, yeah. It's
yeah.
about, making the wrong choice and then continuing to make bad choices and them just piling up until there's no way out. And
that'll be an eventual segue into us discussing at length Billy Bob Thornton's bank choice. Incorrect. That's later in the show. So.
We'll get there.
Yeah.
So it's funny that Virginia, you say, you could have just gotten a divorce instead of murdering your wife. Coincidentally, one of my favorite pieces of advice I got when I was getting married, which is my best friend's mom gave it to me. And, she's always got great words of wisdom. She actually said, murder, yes, divorce, no. So, but don't worry, Nick, I'm not going to do anything.
Okay.
So as
Make
far as
sure your
tonally-
hammers are like put away.
Oh, yeah. So tonally, I feel like I'm kind of on Virginia's side, and I think actually maybe I'm gonna be the odd person out here that I don't feel like they totally match tonally. I mean, nothing's gonna be exactly the same, but I feel like they kind of lose some of the Coen Brothers' heart, and I'll get into it in a minute. But I want to bring up just kind of visual elements that will reiterate Virginia's point and what I'm getting at here. So even if we're looking at the title cards for the movie, it's a little, the palette overall for the movie is lighter than the show. So this is the opening, iconic. And when we look at the TV show, here's the opening. So already just from the get-go, one of them opening during the day, yes, there's a snowstorm. The other one being at night with a lot of dark palette, red in there, all of that you're set up for a lot of negativity. And I have seen for sure season 1 and 2, and I think part of 3 I kind of lost interest. I saw it back when it first came out. I was watching it pretty much live. But when I'm revisiting it now, I think there's just been so much negativity that I had a hard time getting through it. And I know Virginia shares that sentiment. So opening with this was season 1, episode 1, and then I'm going to skip ahead here. This is one of the shots in the first sequence of Billy Bob Thornton driving down the highway, and then, he hits a deer and goes off the road. But look at that. I mean, cinematically beautiful. I love the lighting on it and how they're using that snow kicking up to pick up the red, which of course is super exaggerated because that's theoretically just his taillights. But you have this I don't know, the flames of hell are bursting forth and he's flying through.
Yeah, it looks like he's entering through a portal, which
Yeah,
tracks
exactly.
with the character for the rest of the show.
Yeah, well, and maybe that kind of goes with your theory that we're getting into this Coen Brothers universe, but we're blazing through the gates of hell to get there.
I would say that I don't think that Hawley was meaning to match the tone of the film. I don't think that they have the same tone. I think that they diverge and it gets darker, and Hawley has his own vision. But I would point out that the Coen Brothers gave their blessing and executive produced, but they were very hands-off. And the FX was very hands-off. They told Hawley, do whatever you want. And he wrote every single episode of the first season, and he took it into his own personal area that also referenced all these other Coen Brothers things, but is also not Coen Brothers, which I found really interesting.
Man,
You don't feel
good
like
for
the
him.
dialogue kind of, and maybe it's just that trying to write for a Midwesterner, I guess. I was listening to the dialogue in the first episode, and there were parts of it where I was like, people don't talk like this. And then I was talking to my husband about it, who was from Michigan. He was like, they absolutely talk like that. That's exact conversations I've had with people that I'm neighbors with. That's fully true. And there was an element of I'm from the East Coast of Florida, so that is not what you think of when you think of East Coast by any means, but there's an element to that. And living in Los Angeles, where I was just okay, let's just give me the beat. What are you trying to say?
No,
And I felt every
the
conversation was so dragged out.
The Midwest jam is don't ever offend anyone. Don't ever breach that wall of polite conversation. If you have tragedy and trauma, you push that down, you keep that out of the conversation. It's so different than the confrontational East Coast thing or the laid-back West Coast thing or any of that.
Well, the West Coast, everybody's telling everybody about their therapy appointments. You know what I mean? There's an openness that's very different. And even in the scene in the basement that I mentioned earlier, he's killing his wife, and he's just going, oh geez, oh geez, oh geez. And I was just this is crazy. And that level, by the way, of what's the word I'm looking for? the idiosyncrasy, right? The idiosyncratic nature of something like that, to where there's this personification of an archetype of a Midwestern person that we know that is mild mannered. Again, it goes back to that juxtaposition of a mild mannered suppression layered on top of somebody murdering somebody, right? So that's why it's so effective in that way of being this like very unsettling, visceral thing. But I just, in my mind, I was like, there's no way this guy is just going, oh geez, as he's like killing his wife, and I keep getting corrected by people who are from the Midwest, and they're like, yeah, that would happen, which is probably the scariest part of this whole show to me.
It's also the Coen Brothers stock and trade. It's that juxtaposition of extreme sudden violence and then comic relief, or both in the same moment or the same scene. It's blood on snow. It's these two things that shouldn't be happening at the same time, happening at the same time. That's in all of their work.
I want to jump into, speaking of this like Midwest debacle that we have going on, which, Virginia, I'm going to agree with your husband and all others that, yeah, definitely any Midwesterner who's committing murder is going to say, ah, geez, or, ooh, let me squeeze past you there. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I killed you.
So speaking of location, though, let's talk about the setting for Fargo. What do you think is the purpose of putting it in this remote, desolate feeling flat land of nothing but snow and ice? How do you think it adds to the story, or does it really matter? I mean, could we have just thrown this in the middle of the desert? Is there any difference?
Well, it's a pretty classic noir trope, and it's there for a reason. It's that small town feeling of, first of all, it can't happen here, and second of all, that, like I was saying, that Midwest nice that you feel like you're walking around and people have built up so much over the years without being able to let it out, that everyone is just this potential powder keg at any moment, because the suppression has been potentially so great that it can mask really deep, dark events and history, and it makes you, well, it makes me anyway, think of bigger themes, of huge themes of good and evil, and things that are grounded in reality, but also with this like almost ancient evil right underneath.
Well, almost kind of in our last conversation for Cinema Lab, we talked about The Shining, and that being set in such a remote, isolated location, right? We talked about how that really played into a lot of the paranoia elements, that the Jack character starts to feel. So I think, like you said, as like a kind of horror anxiety trope, there's this element of being cut off from a larger population, being cut off from like a larger sect of civilization, and in the absence of a hustle or a bustle, right? Like, what is there that can kind of brew and be birthed in a tiny little town where only 3 sheriffs are there, and they've probably never seen a dead body before the pilot episode, right?
Well, and there's this myth going through all fiction that takes place in a similar setting where, you move to a big city and that's civilization, and civilization equals intelligence and awareness of certain high concepts, which is not really true, but it also implies that the small town setting, the rural setting, has more primitive forces at work. It has, like I said, ancient evil that the human mind hasn't been able to conquer like it has in the civilized sector. Like we've evolved beyond all that good and evil stuff.
Well,
in the
you
big
can
city
almost
here.
you can almost match it to like a pre and post industrial revolution, right? Because to that point, but to kind of take the other side of it, is like a lot of times rural communities do practice primitive elements of very necessary things that we as humans, that like, I've got a frozen pizza waiting for me for dinner tonight. I don't know where those little pepper bits came from on it. I don't know where the meat came from. It came from Aldi, and I had to drive 15 minutes to go to that store, right? I didn't grow the vegetables and then make, you know what I mean? So I think, at least in my mind, there's a lot of times a marriage of this idea of rural with ancient, because a lot of times the like agrarian practices are still very much a part of how people are making a living. And so I think that there's an element to that, at least for me, right? Like my in-laws, I have some in-laws that live in rural Illinois. They're 2 hours from Chicago. It's not far to get to an epicenter of American, culture, but where they live is so far removed from really any sort of civilization that like I'm almost always convinced I'm going to get murdered in like just a field of corn, because who could be in that corn? You don't know. It's so, you know what I mean? So to that point, I think that there's something about rural life that does kind of feel slower, because it oftentimes doesn't lean on such a heavily manufactured element in that like fast-paced nature, right?
Right.
That's for me anyway. That's like my takeaway of why it feels so scary. Also, just scarecrows.
Right. Well, keep in mind, in space, no one can hear you scream.
In corn, it's muffled.
Right. So it's even worse. And I want to say, because we can't go a single episode without mentioning David Lynch and Twin Peaks, all of this applies to Twin Peaks. Think about that show in any other setting. It's such a part of the fabric of it, and it goes into the same kinds of vaguely or overtly supernatural things that I'm talking about. And I think that's a huge influence on Hawley's version of Fargo taking the TV show in that direction. And I've heard whispers that beyond the first season, it gets even more into that. But I don't want to spoil anything, so.
I think you both have really valid points for the setting. I think the detached from the big city part of it is a big key element to Fargo. And the kind of primitive nature of the location, both of you guys touched on that point too, I think is pretty significant with this like concept of the American wilderness, of this frontier that needs to be trailblazed, even though, of course, there's society established there, but it still feels decades behind everything else that we're used to. I think the other thing, though, too, is if we were to have Fargo in, the Southwest, in the middle of the desert, I think you'd have a different kind of subtext to the story. Environmentally, I think the fact that we have snowstorms as a backdrop, and I'm going to pull up a picture again here. Here we go. Since this like snow-covered landscape is pretty prominent, I think that kind of represents like an instability to the environment too, in the same way that if you have like a storm in the desert too, or flooding or something, you get that same kind of concept. So I think you have some instability with this frozen tundra. And then I think the other part of it is representing kind of the static noise and the communication breakdown, with like the white noise of a snowstorm, but then also kind of going to the geographical aspect of that they are hours away from the next big city, or maybe this is the big city, so then anything more modernized beyond that is far away. So that communication is going to take longer. Like it feels like you have to be on horseback, to get to the next town, when really they've got phones and radios and all that, but that's what it feels like. I think that's the importance of putting it in this kind of setting versus anything else.
Well, yeah, an apocalyptic style snowstorm is a plot point in one of the episodes of season 1 of the show too. So.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to say too is comparing this to Twin Peaks. Absolutely, the small town element we have in both, but then you're kind of comparing like a claustrophobia to, what is it, agoraphobia, if you're scared of big open spaces. So similar anxieties with both of them, though Twin Peaks feels like you're just in the middle of the deep woods, and then Fargo, you have no protection around you. So it's really neat to think about how setting can embed itself in our anxieties when we're watching these shows or movies. And you wouldn't think much of it. You'd be like, well, I'm going for the small town thing. But look at what it's doing to us, knowing, when this car goes off the road, like with, let me pull up that last shot. When he goes flying out of the gates of hell into the field, we're thinking, well, it's a snowy highway at night, and what are the chances anyone's going to be around? Like, we don't see a gas station nearby or anything like that. Like, you got miles and miles to go. That's a terrible place to fly off the road, and it happens in both situations. So that feeling of isolation absolutely ties into the Shining, as well as what you guys got into with that last discussion. So the other part I want to get into, as far as like the story, is the opening credits that say, "This is a true story," even though it's not. This is totally fictitious. What do you think is the point of having that for both the movie and the TV series?
Well, so in a little bit of research, I was thinking about other instances of phony true stories. Obviously, the first one that comes to my mind as a massive fan is Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And then I was thinking about the Dragnet TV show from the 50s had a similar opening crawl, basically saying the same thing, even though they're fictitious stories. I don't know if there's an earlier case of it than Dragnet. There probably is, but I didn't really find one. But I think for sure that the Coens were paying tribute to those two sources. They'd be fans of both, as fans of horror and crime noir. But I think that there's just like there's a lot to unpack in those 4 sentences that begin the show, every episode. I think it's almost a verbal riddle that's meant to kind of jerk you around before the action even takes place. This is a true story. The events depicted in this film took place in this case, Minnesota in 1987 for the film. So right there, the viewer is grounded in a real place and in a real time that they know. So it's sort of like, okay, I'm safe because I know I have mastery over this because I know this place and I know this time. And I feel, like what I'm watching is true, then how crazy can it really be? Like I'm not too worried. The third sentence is, at the request of the survivors, the names have been changed. All of a sudden, the word survivors is scary because it indicates that we'll be spending time with those who did not survive, is the implication. And I think right there, that sort of throws you off what you've been thinking about. And then out of respect for the dead, the rest has been told exactly as it occurred. I think at this point in that 4th sentence, your mind is sort of like, well, wait, is it true or is it not true then? Like, how much information are you really giving me? And I think that the character of Marge in the film has a lot to do with that opening statement and the sort of game of truth. Because for Marge, I think that truth is a given. She can't abide a liar. She can't abide a criminal, someone trying to, I don't think she has any sense of irony. Even though she has a sense of humor, I think she would never approach anything with a cynical irony. And she's sort of battling the forces of cynicism and irony in all the other characters and saying, no, like what it is what it is. And all these other people trying to distort the truth, trying to lie and trying to change, your perception. I think that the opening titles play into that and set you up for this confrontation between Marge as this moral compass and almost everyone else in the film. That's my take.
I love it. I think that's great. Virginia, what are your thoughts on it?
First I want to point out that Lachelle, who is, she's watching, she mentioned Picnic at Hanging Rock as another option of that, which I know was a really big influence on Sofia Coppola and like Marie Antoinette and the Virgin Suicides and stuff. I Yeah, I think to Caleb's point, it grounds you in a sense of foreboding realism, and it makes you kind of feel like, okay, well, um, I know that something like this could happen. So the fact that you're telling me that it's a true story kind of makes it feel more present, more just in your face, and possible, right? Like all of this, even with that element of realism, or sort of suspended realism that we've been talking about, there's still this element of like, well, if it's putting me in this setting of it being a true story, and I'm trying to think of really specific examples, but I feel like Blair Witch Project is probably a good example,
Yeah,
right? Because
that's another
like
big one.
that one, we're talking about one of the, well, probably like the most mainstream originator of the found footage genre. But the whole kind of thing with that and why it became so popular was people were genuinely like, oh, was this really actually found foot? Like the way that the production was made and the way that it was built and sort of, promoted was that it was a true story and that it was, and so I think that there's a version of that we see in horror, but then also I would probably venture a guess that just story structure wise, this really probably also gave birth to a little bit of the obsession that we all have with true crime shows, right? And documentaries, and this element of like, they are genuinely true, but then we've seen versions of that where it's been fictitious, but the story beats, the structure beats of doing a true crime kind of deep dive are present. So I think that, probably now we've been in the genre long enough that if we see a version of that done, it's probably done for like the sake of comedy a little bit more. They use it to probably kind of subvert the expectations in a way. But yeah, I would think it's just a way to ground people into a sense of reality, where the whole point of feeling any sort of safety when watching a film or a TV show is that you are removed from it. So it's a way to kind of grab you by the heart or the throat and kind of pull you in and make you be like, no, you are in this snowstorm with us. And as someone who, lived in Michigan for 5 years and finally lived through a snowstorm bad enough for people to stop telling me, don't worry, this really isn't snow, there is an element of like true, I don't want to say like terror because that feels too extreme, but there's a level of anxiety that I had not experienced
Well,
until
it's helplessness. It's
everything had
helplessness
closed down. My job had closed down. The
right.
the schools were closed. Like I broke my yak tracks just trying to walk to a place. Like there was an element, of helplessness. And thank God we didn't lose power. But what if? And then you're back into that thing that we kind of talked about before, which is this idea of a primitive element to a sense of fear. And also, so then I think setting it in the time period of the 80s where, much like we saw and we talked about, I wasn't here for this one because I was having a baby, but I know that you guys talked about in Stranger Things, there was an element of the 80s setting, right? That like so much of the tension in that show would have been solved with just like a text today or like a cell phone call, right? But because they were calling and I can't get him on the phone and it's, he's not picking up and my walkie signal is too weak, or we're, all of those technological elements that now we can't, when we're telling current stories, we have to kind of, I think in a kind of a cool way, write around, because then we have to come up with a new convincing plot foils. All of that adds to it, I think, as well. That was a long answer, but sorry.
I'll also say, as a teenager in the '90s, especially by the time that Blair Witch came out, it was such a '90s thing of like, oh, dude, you saw that movie? You know that's true, right? Yeah, it's totally true. So many people tried to do that, especially after Blair Witch.
Well, because there's, to that point, there's a part of any kind of being a fan of anything that isn't kind of mainstream that I think, I'm speaking from personal experience only, but gives one a feeling of superiority, right? We kind of mentioned it with our Mystery Science Theater episode. with something like that, where it's like circulating the tapes and it's very kind of underground, and you want to introduce people to it and you want them to be in on the secret, but you want to be the one to tell them the secret, right?
Right.
You want to be the one that has let them into that, so that, you know, they can experience it in the same way that you did. There's a part of that, I think, that just makes you feel like, you know, well, I know this is a real, you know, true story, you know. So I think that all lends really well to, I think probably horror more than any other genre, because it plays on so many of our primal instincts and fears and base levels of paranoia that, like, other genres, right? Like watching something like Walk the Line. No, what was Walk Hard, Walk Tall, the Dewey
The
Cox
Dewey
story,
Cox.
right? Another example of that being like, we're doing pretty much a direct parody of Walk the Line with Joaquin Phoenix and Johnny Cash and that whole vibe, but it's like, this is a true story. This is a real, you know, true story about a real American legend or whatever. That works well in comedy, but the whole time, because it's farcical, we already understand that that is played for comedy too. So there's just, I think it works in a lot of different genres, but I think it probably works the best in like suspense and horror.
Well, and I think the thing that both of you guys are getting at about a story that's based on true stories that are not actually true, usually the purpose of it is it's pointing to a deeper truth. These are stories that not only can reveal things about the way the world really is, but the other part of it is stories about stories usually help kind of reflect people's sense of themselves in the world too. And I mean, that's the nature of movies, is living vicariously through the protagonist and projecting all your anxieties and things like that on those characters and like living through these journeys. And what was the other thing I was going to say? I think Virginia was talking about it, of kind of being removed from it. Like, you're watching a documentary and it's scary, like a true crime documentary, right? You're watching it because it's scary, because it's true, but you have this like veil of security, you know, you're watching it through this lens. So it's this weird, I don't know, situation that you're popping on Fargo, which we know is fiction, but then you are kind of tricked in the beginning because it says it's based on a true story, but then you're kind of questioning, wait, what? I thought this was just a whatever movie. I didn't know it's based on a true story. So then it's kind of playing this psychological game on you, that you were going into it thinking you're watching it through a really thick lens of fiction, not this thin lens of true crime. So now you're kind of like, I don't know what to do. So it sets you up for anxiety. And that gets to the next point of the overall theme of subverting expectations. So here's the point of what I was going to say in the beginning of why I don't feel like the movie and the show tonally match, particularly with the theme of postmodernism. That's the element that I absolutely love about the Coen Brothers movie, is most of their films fall under this category of postmodernism. What is postmodernism? Well, an easy way to kind of explain it is if we're thinking of fine arts. Most people know the Dada movement, right? Are you guys familiar with that term? And the iconic piece of art in the Dada era is the urinal that was put on a pedestal in an art museum. So it's questioning, what is high art, what is low art, what is art? And it's also very self-aware. And I think that's what the Coen Brothers do really well, is that they have movies that are self-aware of how convoluted they are. Like if you think about Burn After Reading, you know, not to spoil anything about the movie, but at the end it's like, so what the hell was the point of this? That's exactly it. That's postmodernism. And I feel like Fargo, the movie, does a really great job of harnessing all the elements of postmodernism. And the point is supposed to be, when you get to the end, you're like, wait, what? And we do get set up with both of them, with one of the elements of postmodernism could be this story of a story that's not true. Think of it as postmodernism for films is you're kind of getting trolled when you're watching the movies. Your expectations are constantly being subverted. You're being thrown through, different twists and turns with it. again, it's very self-aware. Things are very meta. And it's challenging your suspense of disbelief too. So yes, both the movie and the TV series do that, but I feel like the way that the Coen brothers handle it is in a much more lighthearted and like fully appropriate way. I feel like this show was trying to do that and had some tentpole moments of it, but I think they were shifting too much into just like a dark crime series like True Detective or something like that, which is fine. And I think it could work as that, but that's why I just love the movie so much more. I really enjoy the show, but I love postmodernism in films.
Well, I think what they both share in that respect is their masterful use of misdirection. And in the film, there's so many. That's another thing that ties into the opening title, like you were saying, being sort of upended by assuming you're going to watch a fictional story and then it tells you it's true. The misdirection of who is the protagonist, who are the antagonists, who do I think is cool, who do I not like, what's the thrust of the story. And I think what it does in the series with that is it does it many times throughout the series, but the most notable time is when we start out and we're assuming that Lester is the protagonist, and oh boy, this guy is just so put upon, and he's the guy we're going to follow, and like poor guy, and then he does this monstrous thing, and Virginia, who didn't watch any further, he just keeps on doing monstrous things, and he reveals himself to be so much more of a sociopath than even that one act could have prepared you for. So,
well, I think this is a perfect segue into my deepest contribution for this conversation, which is based on only watching the pilot. I have 3 guesses for what the first season of Fargo, the TV show, is about. Now that you have told me that Lester is on much more of a sociopathic journey, I'll leave that out and I'll just assume that he's like a side character in all of these main quests that I'll be talking about. The first one, which I think is probably the likeliest of all of the scenarios for what this season is about, is that Billy Bob Thornton, his character, the rest of the season, every episode is him just trying to find a barber who can give him a haircut that does not give him away as a murdering sociopath. Does it happen? We don't know. I don't know. It could. I'm hoping, yes, eventually by the last episode, we finally see this nice reveal. It's a lot of close-up cuts, oh, there's a drape around his shoulders. Oh, there's scissors. It's a misdirection. Is he going to murder somebody? No. He's just getting bang extensions to round out his very large forehead. And he finally gets a little bit of the respect that he deserves from people because he's not running around looking like a Cabbage Patch Kid. Option 2.
Wait, before you get into number 2, can I just say that, like, I would love to see a mashup of
all of that.
No, of this Billy Bob Thornton's character. I'm drawing a blank on his name. And
Malvo.
I would
sounds
love
like
to
a
see,
magician.
Well, maybe he is. Maybe that's in the sequel. But I want to see like his storyline, but going in the direction of Sweeney Todd. I'm just saying that would be really cool. That'd be a misdirection.
The opposite way is it's actually just like every episode is like backtracking more and more and more to the person that gave him that haircut, and that was actually his first murder victim. Any of these is believable to me. Number 2.
Is your third
sorry.
point about haircuts, or can I jump in with my haircut thing?
No, that was my only point about haircuts, actually. Surprisingly, because there's a lot of head choices happening, much like other shows that we have talked about.
Much like previous episodes of this show.
There's a lot of head choices.
So that was obviously the first thing I noticed in the first episode too. I was like, oh, so that's your hair? That's weird. Here's what I think. Well, first of all, the official story is that Billy Bob Thornton got a bad haircut, and he showed up for casting with his bad haircut. It wasn't necessarily what we see in the show, but it was bangs. And
so that was them trying to fix it.
No. He was unhappy with it, but then all of a sudden he looked at the character as like, yeah, it makes sense. This guy is off kilter. Why wouldn't he have this completely strange, incongruous to any era that he's living in haircut? So he kept it, Noah Hawley liked it. He felt like he understood the character because of the haircut. And I do want to point out something. There's another Coen Brothers film that features a character with a very bizarre haircut, and it was much talked about upon release, and that is Anton Chigurh from No Country for Old Men.
Oh yeah, the bowl cut.
And I think
Yeah.
that
So I guess it's not as
Hawley,
flop.
Who wore
I
it
think that-
better?
right, I think that what Hawley saw in Billy Bob's bad haircut was an echo of the Chigurh character, where it's this weird juxtaposition of this malevolent, seemingly outside of reality evil character with this dopey, weird wig. And does that make them scarier because, like, something's not right about that?
It absolutely
Chigurh
does.
should not have that haircut. Chigurh should have a shaved head or something. You know, he's this, like, monster rampaging through the world. So to me, I think that that's a clear reference point.
I think
even
it's
if
a
it
choice of
happened
a heavy bang is really what we're seeing as a through line for somebody who has sociopathic tendencies. No, I do think to that point, that makes total sense to me, but that was kind of the underlying point of that like weird bit that I just tried to do was like fully this man looks insane. So like there's an element to where it's like, don't make yourself suspect number one walking into any place and letting other human beings look at you with that, because not only do you now have like an incredibly distinguishing feature, right, which is just like insane bangs, it kind of does, to that point, it kind of lends this believability to like, wow, this person is just a little bit cuckoo and like doesn't care, and saw that in the barber chair and was like, good to go. Like, so it was an interesting choice. And especially like just, I mean, that one scene in the pilot where he walks into Sam Hess's garage and it's like, I just wanted to get a good look at you.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna be on my way. I'm just like, how does that guy not immediately go to the police? I mean, we know why he doesn't, but like my first inclination would be like, guys, I don't even know if this is a crime, but this man with real insane bangs came in and just said he wanted to look at me.
Yeah.
How is that not harassment in some form? Like, do you know what I mean? There's just, it's crazy.
It's hard to press charges for a bad haircut, but you can try, you know?
As we talked about in Queen's Gambit, I'm pretty sure that led to her dependency on drugs and alcohol. I'm just saying
Yeah.
that
The haircut
that
did.
season episode wig was just, yeah. Okay, so plot 2 of what I think this season of Fargo could be about. It's the origin story of the kid at the motel who we find out by the end of the season has a Joker-esque arc, and he is just on a vigilante spree peeing in every person's gas tank.
Yep. Would watch.
And then the third one is actually a little bit sweeter. It's a redemption story of Sam Hess's sons, because they realize that their father was human trash. So they go on an arc to sort of right his wrongs, if you will. He was in the organized crime. They become officers of the law to try to uphold just decency and honor. They patch up. They don't hit each other with hockey sticks anymore. They become lifelong friends, and they break the generational curse. That one's more of a lifetime element, I would say, but also believable. So
That is just so beautiful. I love
Isn't
it.
it?
I'm just
I
going to
think
green light all of this.
I would say that every element of that could work. But that's what I am guessing season 1 of Fargo is about, because I did not do my homework.
They're very educated guesses. So I want to pull up a comment real quick to kind of back up to what we were talking about earlier with the Coen Brothers. And actually, another element of postmodernism is intertextuality, or referencing other works of fiction within a work of fiction. And one of our favorite attendees here, Mary.
Hi, Mary.
In the Fargo series, can you talk about some of the references to other Coen Brother movies, whether it's music or dialogue or classic lines? And I actually have some examples beyond that. But what did you guys notice when you were watching the show? Any references you were picking up on?
Yeah, too many. I honestly, I told my mom this last night when we talked about this very thing, that I started keeping a list as I was watching the first season, and then eventually I was just like, this is pointless. It's not just that there are references in dialogue or in, visual poetry or rhyming with other films or similar situations. It goes into this deeper fabric of, like, I would hear a single word and it would make me think of Raising Arizona. I would see like some weird outfit choice and I would think of Barton Fink or something, and it's just like somehow Hawley wove this all together and made it seem like it's part of this Coen-verse without introducing it and being like, hey look what I did, hey, see that reference, that's cool, right? I never got that sense. It was just this, it's like we're living in this one sphere of creativity. No, I'm not going to talk about that because there's too much. There's too much in the first episode, I think. I didn't make a list beyond that. There was just so much.
Well, I want to point out two things that I noticed in the first episode, two of my favorite things. I mean, as Caleb said, there's a whole bunch in there. But some little Easter eggs that hopefully you guys caught. The first one, and I'm sorry this picture is really dark and I debated putting like a red circle around it, but hopefully you can see it. There's something in the shot there to the right of that car. Did you guys catch it when you were watching it?
It's not a snowplow.
It
That
sure
ain't no
ain't.
snowplow.
That is a yellow wood chipper. And
That's the thing you put people in.
no, can I just say,
sorry.
so when I was pulling together the PowerPoint, and Caleb sent me a bunch of pictures. Of course, the wood chipper moment was in there. And I have watched a lot of horrific films, a lot of disgusting and disturbing stuff. And for whatever reason, I cannot handle that scene.
You don't like
I couldn't
you don't like a little leg just going in there, just being stuffed in?
I don't know what it is. I can talk about it. That's no problem.
Yeah.
But when I pulled up that picture and I was terrified that you were going to put it in there, it just like gets to my core. I don't know if I have this deep-seated fear of being put through a wood chipper, but
Yeah.
it is horrifying.
Talk about
Absolutely
Sweeney
horrifying.
Todd. That's that
Oh.
element. That's that grinding. You know what I mean?
Dude,
But also,
Sweeney Todd is like Sesame Street compared to this for whatever reason. I don't get it.
they're in the meat pies.
That's
That's a
funny.
whole other conversation. But to your point, though, is it? I have to ask: is it because the evidence is disappears because of this, or gets smaller and minuscule? Right? Is there an element to it where it's like that violence is different on a different level because it's kind of burying evidence, or is it just something about
I don't
seeing
know.
chunks fly that you're just not a fan of?
It's not even that. Like, super graphic stuff doesn't like really bug me. I mean, I was going to go into the medical industry before I became such a film nerd. I wanted to be a surgeon, so I have no problem. But there's just something so visceral about that. And I think it's
Yeah.
partially the sound, too, of hearing the wood chipper.
The sound
It's
is
just-
definitely a part of it, yeah.
I can't handle it. But anyway, I thought it was very precious that they included that as a little Easter egg in this shot. And you would think that it's a snowblower. It would make sense. Why would you have
Right.
a wood chipper outside in front of a strip club too? Just strange. But, spoiler alert, we know that Sam Hess there in that car is gonna get moited in this scene. So a little nod to that. The other shot that I wanted to bring up was this one. And as you take a little peek at that menu board,
Yeah.
White Russian, so of course a reference to the Big Lebowski too. So yeah, again, as Caleb mentioned, there are so many Easter eggs, whether it's the music, the dialogue, anything like that are in this, but I really like some of these production designs, the art direction that has nods to it as well.
Can you
I
actually?
also-
Oh, you go first. Sorry, Caleb.
Just a real quick thing. When I was preparing my notes here and I was putting down cast and characters and stuff, it's not that I didn't think about it while watching the show, but Marge Gunderson, Molly Sulverson, Jerry Lundegaard, Lester Nygaard, two A's in each of those. The sort of compatible analog in the film for Lorne Malvo, at least as an agent of chaos, would be Gare Grimsrud. Gare Grimsrud and Lorne Malvo What
Yeah.
are those names?
They're competing dueling magicians from
They're
opposite
so-
sides of the state.
They're so nonsensical sounding.
They both wear capes on their off days. Like,
Well, what it does is it instantly, when I heard Lauren Malva, I was like, oh, that's an anagram. That's an anagram for something. So I looked it up. It's not. People all over the internet are trying to figure out what it's an anagram of. It's just weird sounding. And it's like, it's that thing of like, ooh, I bet you that's something. And then it's like, no, it's not something.
Well,
As
and
opposed
I think
to, you know, it's that misdirection of like,
Yeah.
which is the clue that I should follow? Which is the thing that should pop out at me? And which is the thing I should pursue? And which is just weird because it's weird. you know?
Yeah, it's like the red herring of the story. Honestly, when I heard Lauren, I think Lauren Michaels from Saturday Night Live. But I do like that people are going on this, I don't know, this kind of witch hunt thing to figure out
Yeah,
if it's an
I found it-
anagram.
I found a very long and very humorous Reddit thread that revealed no clear answers. And also, just on the subject of names, I love when any fictional character has a name that says what they do, like Molly Solverson, who literally solves the case. That's so cute. I think that's so funny. I don't know.
Well, speaking of Molly, I want to jump back to a point that we started making a little bit ago of the fact that with the series, you think that you're following the protagonist, like with Lester, but then we kind of learned that Molly is more the protagonist of the story, but she doesn't come about until about 30 minutes in, or maybe that was Marge. Anyway, the point being that when we open, you think you're supposed to identify with this person, and then it's another like subverting of expectations of what you're supposed to do with the story, and then we're thrown somebody else to follow. Having that kind of, I don't know, narrative structure, I guess, or lack of structure, what do you think that's doing for the story or for the viewers?
I mean, beyond it being just another case of misdirection meant to sort of unmoor you, I was thinking about the fact that in the film, so Marge arrives 30 minutes in. This is a 90-minute film, so that's a third of the way. That's crazy. Part of that, to me, speaks to the climate of 1996 and what they were writing in this post-Reservoir Dogs, post-Tarantino, every movie's got to have two cool hitmen in it era, where you start. It's hard to picture now because we've all seen the movie, but when audiences first saw Fargo in '96, I think part of the reason it was such a big hit was you start the film and you think, oh, cool, these two hitmen, they're going to be quirky, they're going to be funny, they're going to have a weird relationship, we're going to follow them, those are like my weird anti-heroes. Or same thing as Jerry Lundegaard, where it's like, oh, this guy is the underdog, I'm going to get some delight in seeing him, screw over the people that are holding him down and things like that. And both of those things totally go off the rails the second that Marge is introduced, where you go, no, wait a minute, Jerry is a total weasel, and I can't possibly root for him. And these two criminals are not, there's no glamorization of what they're doing. It's summed up in the speech that Marge gives to Stormare's character in the back of the cop car at the end of the movie, where it's sort of like, in this era, crime was so cool and getting away with stuff was so cool and it was so hip and everything, and she breaks it down to be like, this is dumb. You did this all for just a little bit of money, you killed all these people, and for what? And it's like, that was such a subversive move to make in 1996 because of all the Tarantino ripoffs that were coming out that were saying the opposite. It's like, yes, it's so cool to commit crimes, steal, get one over on your neighbor, and Marge comes in and just kicks in the door of that whole idea and rips it down, basically. I think that was the Coens absolutely commenting on that very cynical late 90s edge.
I think that's a really interesting point. And to that note, too, something else I noticed when we're talking about intertextuality with the show was we had, and I'm not sure if it was an episode or one or two, but actually I think it was two, is when we're kind of introduced to some classic Tarantino-style shots with the two goons that are helping Sam Hess and his family. We have that trunk shot where the camera is in the trunk looking up at them, with their hand on the door of the trunk. So I think that you're onto an absolutely accurate theory of a nod to the Tarantino kind of era. Virginia, what do you think? What do you think about changing heroes partway through the movie?
Muted. Sorry, I was muted. I think the most like clear example for me would be like the original Psycho, right? Like we're introduced to this lovely lady. We think it's going to be about her, and she's getting out of her office, and she's getting away from her boss, and then she goes to this hotel, and we think that we're just going to follow her journey, and then we're like presented with that iconic shower scene. What, 15 minutes in, 20 minutes in? I don't know.
No, it's halfway through the movie.
Oh,
It's
okay.
halfway
So
through
it's
that we've been following Janet Leigh.
so it's a long time that we think that it's one thing, and then it becomes this other thing. And so I think that I think that's just fun storytelling a lot of times too, to be honest. Like I think there's such an element to that where as like a writer person who sometimes has to write in a paid capacity, but mostly does it for free. Like I think that that's just one of the storylines that you hope that you would come up with, right? Is that misdirection in a way that truly does kind of catch people's breath. And it seems to kind of happen a lot in horror too. Because like I think about, there's some pretty famous examples, right? Like Drew Barrymore's character in Scream, there's all these like setups for like, we're probably going to be following one person, and then it kind of comes and is another person. And I just think that that's really fun. I don't know. I don't have anything like super, groundbreaking to say about it other than just as a storytelling device. I think it's cool. But also in this particular series, right? Like you learn Lester doesn't kill his wife until basically the end. It's the last act of the pilot episode, but there's a building in, I don't know, probably something to do with how they shoot him, right? Like the camera movements, the way that he's framed, the tension that's built on all of these kind of puzzle pieces they're adding on, his terrible job. The bully is still in town. He gives himself a bloody nose because he got scared and ran through a door. Like there's elements where you are, in one sense, maybe set up to empathize, but then almost in a Joaquin Phoenix Joker way, what you end up seeing is this origin story of somebody's sociopathy having legs to now come out because there was one catalyst of one person with terrible bangs in a hospital that convinces you that you should probably. But even that, like watching that scene, right? He didn't say, go kill your wife. Like he was basically talking about this concept of manhood, masculinity, strength, honor, these kind of larger concepts that then that planted the seed in Lester, who we had seen time and time again had kind of just drawn the short straw. Does that give him license to murder his wife with a hammer? Absolutely not. But I think what the show was trying to do was kind of set it up to where when that happened, it pulls that empathetic rug right out from under your feet because you have been primed to be on this guy's side. And then you're like, oh, he's kind of the worst. So it does. Similarly, it kind of just like takes that out from underneath of you and kind of just catches your breath in a way that I think is just, it's cool to think of stuff like that. Like as a person who studies and loves film, I think it's fun to analyze how those misdirections can be also really great storytelling and something now that we all hope to emulate in terms of twists and, stuff like that.
Well, and to kind of piggyback off what you're saying there of pulling that rug of empathy out from under the character and under the audience too, the point of doing that where you change heroes mid-movie or mid-show is to cause unconscious anxiety for your viewer. Because now they are unconsciously thinking, who do I identify with next? And so they no longer have this like comfort blanket of, oh, there's someone I identify with, and we're going to go through this journey together, and we're going to survive this together too. That's part of the catharsis of watching a movie, is to project your own issues, your own anxieties, insecurities, inner demons, whatever you're dealing with in life, whether it's you personally or on like a larger macroscopic societal level too. We've talked about that before, that you're going with this hero on their journey. And so your expectations are that you're going to see them through to the triumph at the end. But when you're changing that and when you're pulling that rug out from under them, it absolutely rocks the boat, causes anxiety, and now they're not sure who to identify with and if they can identify with anyone too. So that right there is another element of this postmodernism of, it's not the standard narrative structure that we're used to, at least speaking to like Hollywood narrative. It's not a standard cinematic device, even though, yes, we're talking about some pretty significant examples like Psycho that do that, but this is the point of this style, this form of art, is to challenge those art expectations and keep you on your toes.
So you saying that just made me kind of have a little, like, two things came to my mind. The first one would be, and we reference the show all the time because it's a cornerstone of modern storytelling, but Breaking Bad and Walter White, right? Like, within the first few episodes, we understand that he is slowly losing his humanity, but the character of Hank specifically, who we're introduced to in that first season, in the first few episodes, is kind of like, I mean, bully is the correct term in relation to Walter. I don't think he's like a violent bully or anything, but he kind of, he's always like teasing him and giving him a hard time, and kind of, he's the more outgoing of the two brothers that have been married to these sisters. You know what I mean? So there's that comparison, but then by, I mean, it's the last season, but a few episodes in, that Ozymandias, am I pronouncing that right? That quintessential episode of Breaking Bad in the last season.
Which we won't talk about what happens in, but
because you haven't seen
dramatic.
it.
No, I have, but
but we didn't put a spoiler alert on this episode.
There are
millions
watching currently who.
But are we worried about spoiling a show that ended like 6 years ago?
Yes, because it's worth watching Breaking
Bad. That's fair.
There are still people out there.
Yes.
Like, I don't know.
So to that point,
I didn't watch it until just a few years
watch
ago.
It because it's worth seeing that arc with Hank and how you kind of end up emotionally turning. But then also, similarly, Game of Thrones, which I have no worries about spoiling, because if you haven't seen it, that's your own fault.
Don't.
Really?
Yes, I've only seen season 1.
Guys, come on.
This is not spoiler club.
Well,
this is not spoiler.
You've seen season 1 then. Caleb, have you seen season 1?
I've seen the whole thing, but
great. Well, then I will just talk about the ending of season 1, which is where we think our assumed protagonist, Ned Stark,
that's another good
dead. Boom.
Example.
So then emotionally, to your point, Sarah, you have to then readjust and retarget who that, that character that you are relating to is going to be in season 2, because everything that you thought that the show was going to be about is kind of just taken away with like one big axe swing. So then it kind of, not only do they focus more on other characters, but you then have to, as a viewer and as someone who's consuming, you kind of have to then look into the gray areas, because Ned was such a black and white honor kind of a person that it makes you and forces you to. Mary just said no spoilers for anything. Sorry, Mary.
We're very anti-spoilers in my family. I'm sorry.
See, I'm literally the opposite in my family. We don't believe that spoilers exist. They're not real things, because you just, I live life, I just enjoy it.
Well, I just want to kind of wrap up what you're saying here. Gets back to the theme we were talking about earlier, just with the setting of the show, that there's this sense of helplessness with being in this kind of primitive-esque culture, as well as the American wilderness, whether it's in the middle of a snowstorm or in the middle of a desert or in the deep woods, this helplessness. So when you're watching the show, whether it's Fargo or Twin Peaks or whatever, you feel like the hero and all the characters too are kind of helpless because they're sort of in the middle of nowhere. But now when we're adding this other element of you don't have a friend to get through this journey with, you are now helpless too. So it's pulling you in. And I feel like it's a similar device of like breaking the fourth wall when the character looks right at the camera, is it's kind of incriminating you. It's pulling you into the story too. So you're no longer a passive viewer, you are active in the story. So I think it's a really neat device. And I mean, there's layers of devices here in the show as well as the movie.
Well, and we've talked about Lester, but the other obvious one is the chief, the original chief Vern in the first episode, who is then killed after you're kind of. I mean, it's pretty telegraphed, but you're led to believe that he's a main character, and then he's dispatched, and it just upends you. It makes you think, if this can happen, then anything can happen.
Yeah.
And that's a scary thought for anyone who's, a fan of narrative fiction, basically.
That paint can scene was so sad.
True.
It was.
I'm soft now, you guys. I'm sorry. I can't handle it.
It's all good. I think we're all a little sensitive to this stuff now too. So I know we're kind of running a little short on time, and I want to make sure we get through a couple other points. One thing, when we're talking about intertextuality, we talked about Tarantino's trunk scenes showing up in episode 2. We've talked about a lot of intertextuality with other Coen Brother movies and that sort of thing. But one other thing that I thought was really fascinating that I think really kicked off in episode 2 was the use of deep focus. And if you're going to talk about deep focus as far as cinematography, you absolutely have to talk about Citizen Kane. So hopefully everyone who's watching is at least familiar with Citizen Kane, even if you're not a super fan. Me.
Are we going to spoil Citizen Kane for people? Have we allowed that?
No, we're not.
Statute of limitations gone.
It's no. It still applies, and I'm not spoiling it. I'm just talking about this cinematic technique.
Simpsons
So, with Citizen Kane, this technique of deep focus is, I know it's a little tricky to see with a small picture, but it's that everything in the shot is in focus, and the point of that is that you are supposed to be distracted by what's in the background as well as trying to pay attention to what's going on in the foreground. So with this scene, you have a conversation happening here, but then you have young Kane is outside playing in the snow, and so you're like paying attention to him, and it can be used as a device for, irony or, a metaphor. Whatever's going on in the background is a metaphor for the dialogue that's happening in the foreground. And so I really liked, there were a lot of examples of it in episode 2. I pulled a couple of shots here. So one, when we are in Gus's kitchen and we were introduced to his lady neighbor in the scene just before this, but now when he's sitting down and having dinner with his daughter, then you can see, and again, I'm sorry, it's a dark picture, but you can see the window frame back there that her family is having dinner too. And another example, when they are in the back office of the grocery store, and you have, it's always like a frame within a frame too. It's kind of like there's a movie going on in a movie, which plays to even the concept we're talking about of this is based on a true story, even though it's not true, Mm-hmm. So very meta, very layered. I just thought that was fantastic that they bring in this, whether it's a nod to Citizen Kane or just a really great use of that deep focus. I just really appreciate it. So just had to throw that in there.
Good call.
All right. I think I've checked off most of the stuff off my list of what do I want to talk to. Before we get to recommendations, though, is there anything else that you guys want to bring up about the show or the movie?
Yes.
That you'll regret if we don't talk about it? Caleb, go.
Yeah, just fun fact, the series has been nominated for 226 awards since its premiere. It's won 51 of them. We're talking Emmys, Golden Globes, Screen Actors Guild, literally any awards you can think of that pertain to TV, which I knew the show was floating around, and I sort of had just always put it off watching it because, as I said, I couldn't imagine that it could be that good. I'd heard good things, but the odds were not good for it to be watchable, even as an adaptation of a favorite film of mine. But I found that pretty staggering as a statistic. We didn't talk about music at all, but Jeff Russo's score is incredible for the series. He is a guy who has been tasked with adapting or expanding on previously created music. He did the scores for Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek Picard, previous episode, and he's doing the music for the forthcoming Clarice, which kind of ties into this whole adaptations for TV based on classic films, which we didn't really touch on either, but man, Clarice, Bates Motel, Ratched, like so many of these things coming out in the last decade, and it really ramped up, I feel like, in the last 5 years. Anyway, I think that the main title music of the film and the series should be listened to back to back, and it sort of tells a story and it drops you into the setting in a way that audio-wise tells you everything you need to know. So I would recommend checking those out, divorced from the visuals, because they're really, really beautiful pieces of music and really terrifying at the same time.
Did you say the composer for Fargo, the series, you said he also did Clarice?
He's going to be doing Clarice.
What do you mean he's going to be doing it?
Is it out?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know, man.
Oh my goodness.
Hey, I'm currently watching a show that came out in 2014, so...
You're still not done with Gilmore Girls?
And I'm still not done with Gilmore Girls. Cue the theme song with the record scratch.
Well, the Clarice is, I think, so far, it's a really interesting adaptation, or, picking up where the movie left off. But I gotta say, my one beef is that they don't, as of so far, they don't use goodbye horses in it at all. And I feel like, I know that seems kind of corny, but I feel like it could have fit so well, even in the opening title sequence.
Yeah.
Would have been really neat. I think his score is really neat in general, but man, I just miss that iconic thing. I don't know if it was a licensing issue or...
there was a legal...
If Kevin Smith can get it for Clerks 2,
I
I'm
know.
sure that this TV show can get it.
You would think, and it's not that the show is like drastically different from the movie. I think they do a really interesting job of continuing the story and kind of holding some of the same tonal elements, so it wouldn't be out of character to have that song in there. But that's all I'm going to say.Maybe we'll have a chat about Clarice in the future.
But how are the wigs? We need to know the head situation.
What is the head styling happening?
Is it a wig on Clarice? I don't think so, but I'm also not a wig expert, so we'll wait till Wig Wednesday and then have Virginia analyze it. So thank you.
Well, what did we say the new thing was going to be?
How do you say that word? Coiffeur?
Coiffeur corner, right? I think you can shorten it to quaff, right? Like your quaff corner.
Sounds vaguely inappropriate, but hey, I got one more thing, real quick.
What's up?
When we're talking about this, whether the series successfully adapts or spins off of the film, did you guys know that there was already a Fargo TV show attempt in 1997?
That actually aired?
Yes.
I did not know that.
There was a pilot made that they aired as a TV movie, 1997, 1 year after the film. They rushed into production way too soon. It was a direct sequel. It took place just a couple of months after the events of the film. It was Marge Gunderson. Officer Lou is in it. The pilot was directed by Kathy Bates.
Whoa.
And Edie Falco played Marge.
Oh.
And if that would have gotten picked up, she wouldn't have been able to do Sopranos 2 years later. So think about that alternate timeline. You can watch it on YouTube. I got about 4.5 minutes in. And it underlined to
not
me
great.
even more why this TV series is, in my opinion, doing it right, and moving away from the easy thing of just quirky people and funny dialogue, and let's just make a little TV show about it. And it obviously did not work in 1997. So
That doesn't seem shocking that it didn't
Yeah,
work.
no.
But
yeah,
so
the fact
that's
that I'd never even heard of it though was slightly shocking to me.
well, I think that reiterates this theory that it's not that great. I haven't seen it, but so that could be the intro to our recommendations is maybe go watch this pilot episode, at least watch 4 minutes and see what happens. I don't know.
Okay.
I'm gonna
I-
check it out.
As a curiosity, sure.
There you go. There you go.
Before we get into recommendation, I just have two really quick things. The first one is also a music related thing, in that the composer for the film is a fellow by the name of Carter Burwell. You probably know his name because he composed almost all of the Coen Brothers films, but also he did the soundtrack for Twilight. So in case you were wondering where that emotional through line is, it's right through Robert Pattinson and his non-heart because he's a vampire. Second thing is, and we did not have to get too deep into it, but I do just want to I have a slight beef with the show. One episode in, the beef is not related to dialogue, not really. I am tired of the trope of equating sex workers and strip clubs with seedy men and behavior. Obviously, we see Sam Hess, he gets murdered in a strip club. He's in the back room with a sex worker. Can't we just let that die as like a storytelling device? I feel like when I watched it, I was annoyed at how it was too easy. It was too easy of a give. And I really don't need to go into depth into this super hard, but just the feminist filmmaker in me is just, I'm incredibly tired of seeing that as a way to sort of quantify a bad character's badness, right? Can't we just leave that be? He's an organized crime guy. He cheats on his wife. He's terrible to his children. Isn't that enough evidence that he's a bad man that we should not be rooting for? Do we need to put him in the crosshairs of sex workers who are just trying to do their jobs, it's a Tuesday night. Who knows? They're not trying to be thrown into wood chippers or a party to murder that they can't even tell who murdered him because blood got in her eyes and stuff. We can leave it at that. I don't need to get too into it. I could get very upset about it. But as a storytelling trope, there were so many things that we've talked about here that subverted expectations, that did it well, that did it successfully, that turned things on its head. Just a siren call to any of our tens of fans listening or filmmakers that might come across this. Let's let that trope go. We don't need to have that be an equation to a quote unquote bad person just because they, frequent the services of sex workers. Let's leave that out of the narrative, because I think you had enough built up that I was on that train with you. I didn't like Sam when he was terrible, to his kids, or when he was bullying another grown man on the streets of his town. Like, we had enough evidence. We don't need to bring the other elements into there. So that was my two things: Twilight and let's leave sex workers alone. There's a lot of common thread.
The funny thing for me is that as you're talking about this, I was like, I forgot all about Sam Hess. And it's like, that's what the beginning of the show compared to the end of, the season. Compared to the end of the season. I was like, that was like a million years ago. I don't even remember that guy.
You're like, who
He's
even
not
is
even
him?
on my radar as an important part of the story anymore. He was merely like one of the first little chess pieces.
Blips,
in the
yeah.
game, so,
which is fine. I just, even more so, I guess,
You're
a
not
reason
wrong.
to not need to pull that in, because
Sure.
if he's so insignificant by the end of episode 10, it's like, find a new way to kind of
bit of a
convince
crutch.
us. Yeah, it's such a crutch. And we see it time and time again. And I'm not going to give examples, like a list or anything, but it's something so familiar that even when I was saying it, you guys were smiling, because I'm sure you had references in your head of other times that this has happened in media. So I think just now we've gotten to like an era where I think that there's other ways to kind of do that. So those are my two takeaways. Twilight, is
Very
the
good.
number one, though.
All right, well, let's shift it over to the recommendations before we wrap this up. So, who wants to go first with what to watch next?
I just have one thing, amazingly.
This is, wow, this is breaking news. Caleb
calendar's-
only has one thing. This is great.
It's
It's
Gilmore
usually
Girls.
20.
Right.
He's trying to get through it.
No, when you're talking about a dead of winter, a small town setting, a seemingly insignificant wrong choice made that leads to sort of the tightening of the noose, tragedy on such a huge scale. I push this movie all the time. For some reason, it's fallen off the radar of society, but A Simple Plan from 1998, directed by Sam Raimi. Call back to my previous comments about his partnership and friendship with Coen Brothers. This was in the period in the late 90s that Raimi was kind of taking a stab at doing these serious dramas, and it was just pre-Spider-Man. I think a lot of people right now would not know Raimi from much before this, other than maybe Evil Dead, Spider-Man, whatever. But he had this period where he made these couple of very serious dramas, but I think this was his actual direct response to his friends, the Coens, making Fargo, because it has so many of the same themes. It touches on so many of the same sort of moral choices and their consequences. And the Coens sort of started out in a similar way that he did too, with a lot more slapstick humor and a lot of crazy situations, and they'd had movies before Fargo, like Miller's Crossing, that were a lot more serious-minded and a lot more rooted in reality. But I think that Raimi saw this and said, "Yeah, I want to try that too." And A Simple Plan is just so underrated. It is so underseen now, and I mean, it's entertaining. It's got great performances. It's got Billy Bob in it, another connection. But to me, it's like the only thing to recommend if you've seen Fargo, if you've seen the series, you liked it, you want something with a similar flavor that's not Coen Brothers. This is like that one other thing that is kind of like a weird cousin to it. Oh, and it'll be available to stream on Amazon Prime, aka The Enemy, on April the 1st. So that's an easy way for you to watch it at home. I would very much encourage you to do that, especially if you're in Michigan and we get our dreaded second winter.
Well, that's cool. I've never seen that movie, but it sounds like a good one to add to the list, and
Yep.
so I'll check it out on April 1st. Virginia, what about you?
I just want to give a shout out to I think, beloved Coen Brothers film, but one that we didn't even really bring up, and I don't have a slide for it because I did not do my homework. But I think people should watch the Hudsucker Proxy because it's a very
yes.
funny, Jennifer
Thank you.
Jason Leigh, you've got Tim Robbins, and it is much more of a comedy and lighthearted and silly. There's still elements of don't worry, somebody's gonna kill himself. If you love Coen Brothers, it's gonna be fine. But I think it's a really good one. And then just show wise, if you you had mentioned earlier, Sarah, talking about breaking the fourth wall and that sort of complicity element of it. Also, in terms of a dark, Lachelle just said, yes, for kids. But for something that's a bit darker, but definitely a comedy and really uses that breaking the fourth wall trope. A previous Screen Club show, Fleabag, is really funny and good and well done and well executed, but also there are similarly mixed tones of very heavy, very deep kind of concepts or experiences, kind of married with this very cheeky, fourth wall breaking protagonist that kind of we, really root for, but she doesn't always have a completely ethical and moral through line. So you can't always kind of she's not a Stark, if that makes sense. There isn't always like a through line of like black and white honor and code for her. So it really does, as a viewer, kind of pull you into this ambiguity of what it is to be a human. And I think it was really well done. And it's only 2 seasons too, so you don't really, it's like BBC series, so it's like short, but you don't, it's not a huge buy-in for time. But it was really well done. I think you can watch it on Amazon Prime. So
I can't wait till I can rewatch that series again.
it's so good.
too.
I mean,
feel like,
yeah. Oh,
and thanks for bringing up Hudsucker Proxy. I feel like I'm the only one who remembers that movie, and I don't know if it's because it sort of has not been available to see, it seems like, for the last 10 years. I'd never see it pop up on streaming services or anything, and I don't know why. I think it's one of the greatest underseen and underrated entertainments of the last 25 years, and it's criminal that it's not talked about more when people are talking about Coen Brothers.
well, and it's not a big leap to see how the character, Jennifer Jason Leigh's character in that film, has directly influenced my entire personality. So, like, I think there's a part of it that I'm like, yeah. I see it. I like it. It's good. So.
Well,
what about you, Sarah? Yeah.
I'm going to go a little darker. And then also, I have 3 recommendations when I normally have 1. So I'm going to give you guys 2
3.
right now. And then we got to have a little setup for the last one. So first, we're going to go super dark, but in the vein of breaking the fourth wall and subverting expectations. And I would maybe categorize this in postmodernism, is the 2007 version of Funny Games, which is done by Michael Haneke. He did another version in '97, which I haven't watched, but I've seen this one, and I've heard a lot of people say this is the better version. I love this movie. It's wild. It's a ride, and I don't want to give anything away. So, but it's a little intense. It can be kind of anxiety-inducing. So if you're not into horror thriller stuff, then stay away. But if you're down for something that really is terrifying, then check it out.
Michael Pitt is another one of those actors that, like, you see him and you can totally see him just like weeping on your shoulder and empathizing, and then you're like, oh, you have bloody gloves in that poster, like what's gonna happen? Like, he's able to twist that in a way that I think there's a few handful of actors that can do that. He's one of those.
Yeah, absolutely. This was a movie that when I was working at the movie theater as a 35 millimeter projection manager, this was one of the first ones I had to build and screen. And you'd watch these movies. Thursday night was the night that we had all the films get dropped off, and you have to tear some down and then put them together and then screen it to make sure that it's in the right order and not upside down and backwards and all that. So watching this one at probably 1 or 2 in the morning on a Thursday night in a multiplex theater all by myself. Cool. Very cool.
This is a film that I would never recommend to anyone, but I feel compelled to watch it every couple of years, and I don't know how to explain that.
Yeah, it's something. It's a ride. We're just going to leave it at that. And now I'm going to go to my next one. So not only as a little nod to a character from Fargo, the TV series, but also getting into this kind of more light-hearted wild ride of crime and craziness. Gotta go with Better Call Saul.
Nice.
Bob Odenkirk is an amazing actor, and he is in Fargo, as you can see on the left there. And we've talked about Breaking Bad, and it's his character from that in a spin-off, which, gosh, are there 3, 4 seasons? I don't think I'm all the way caught up, but I know season 1 was incredible. Season 2, very fascinating. Where I left off, it was just getting kind of crazy in this like Coen Brothers style of misdirection and what is happening, how did we end up here kind of thing. And so it's fun. There is drama to it, but it is kind of a wild ride in a lighthearted way. So
That's a really good call.
Yeah, so a good call for Saul. So check that out. Now, before I get to my third recommendation, I have to set up what our next event for Cinema Lab is going to be. Oh, no, there it is. Spoiler alert. We are going to be doing an awards season style discussion talking about specifically, I'm going to have a hard time not bringing up movies that won or were nominated in the past. But before the Oscars happen, which, Caleb, is it April 25th? Is that right?
25th, yeah.
25th.
Yep.
So before the Oscars happen, we're going to do an episode where we're talking about the nominees and just having a very rich awards season discussion about other awards shows too, not just the Oscars. So BAFTAs, Golden Globes, whatever else. So join us on April 15th, 6 o'clock, another virtual chat. We'll post the nominees here shortly so people can see the different movies that are up and where you can go watch them. And I usually do the Oscar ballot to see if I can guess what they're going to pick, which that's a whole conversation that I think we'll have during this chat. But speaking of Oscar nominated, I don't actually know offhand if this one won, but this was an Oscar short from a handful of years ago that I absolutely love and features Martin Freeman, and it's called The Vorman Problem. And I know a lot of people don't watch the Oscar shorts, which I think is such a shame because it's an avenue for a lot of indie filmmakers to get into the Oscars. And you have some absolutely amazing gems that get in here. And some of them actually go on to become feature films too. So there are indie filmmakers, but then there are also some big key players that make short films. The Pixar shorts, they're always in there. But then you have some indie animators who make films that are incredible too. So I highly recommend checking out the Oscar shorts, but The Vorman Problem is a really fantastic short film that subverts expectations, has a wonderful twist to it, and again, Martin Freeman is in it. I think you can rent it on Amazon. It might be on other streaming platforms too, but if you get a chance, check that out.
I've never even heard of this. How dare you for not telling me about this sooner?
I guarantee I told you about this movie because it's one of my favorite short films, so there you go.
Okay.
All right, you guys, I think we're at the end here.
We did it. Another
We did
one.
it. We made it through. Yay.
Under 2 hours.
Under
Just
2
barely.
hours. So as we said in the beginning, that this is a book club style discussion, but we also really want to hear different recommendations for what you guys are watching, TV shows, movies, whatever. So message us, email us, comment on these chats too, and let us know what you want to talk about. What are the shows you're watching that we can overanalyze and find the Easter eggs in? And I mean, if anyone watching knows us personally, of course, you can DM us, but you can also hit us up on social media like Wealthy Theater or CinemaLab GR. It's the same for Facebook and Instagram. Let us know what you're thinking about, what you want to talk about, all that good stuff.
I will say as a caveat though, as the most emotionally precious of the three of us, because I truly, please do not recommend any murdery things to us. You can recommend them. We will not be doing them for a while. I need a palate cleanse. We don't have Screen Club picked out yet, but one of the things in contention currently is the TV filmography of Guy Fieri. So that's where I am emotionally. I need something light. I need something fun, lighthearted. I'm talking about, we've already done Great British Baking Show, but that, new show with Michelle Obama, Mochi something. I need to watch children's shows. This is where I'm at emotionally. So please, when you are giving us recommendations, I can handle a short form of something murdery. A film is compact. I cannot watch any more murdery TV shows, at least for a little bit. I'm sorry. I just have to let everybody know so that they're not disappointed if they're recommending us a bunch of murderers and we just don't do it. So sorry, I had to give that caveat.
And
I think
if you
that's a
want to
valid
go
point.
heavier than heavy and darker than dark, talk to me.
Exactly. And that can be the backstock, the backlog. We can pull it out in reserves, but truly, we might do a Guy Fieri episode because that is where I am emotionally and the depth that I can handle in terms of severity. And my bracket is in relation to the Food Network show Tournament of Champions season 2. So very different emotional planes right now, but that's kind of where I'm at as just a person trying to survive through this part of the year. I can't. I'm sorry. That makes me sound like such a bummer. I don't mean it to, guys. I just can't handle it anymore.
We just need to take an emotional trip to Flavortown. So
I
it'll
just need
happen.
some sherbet. That's all.
Yeah.
That's it.
So if folks who are watching are really enjoying the discussions that we're having, and we can't wait to do in-person events again, but we can't do it without support. So please consider making a donation to Wealthy Theater. We are a nonprofit performing arts venue, and this is done out of passion and love, and we just really enjoy breaking things down and shedding some light on media literacy. And we do that because Wealthy Theater is part of a larger nonprofit called the Grand Rapids Community Media Center, and our mission is to build community through media. So that's what we're after. We're trying to connect to the community while we're very socially distant. So if you want to support what we're doing, again, you can either go to wealthytheater.org/donate or grcmc.org/donate. We're all part of the same organization. Okay, we did it. We're at the end. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch Fargo or rewatch the movie and then get into the TV show. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Sorry it was another violent choice, but tune in next time as we get into awards and frosted tips and Flavortown.
And paninis. That's what I've got right now.
And paninis. All right. Well, Virginia, Caleb, it's been real. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you next month.
Bye.